Okay, welcome back. This is Miss Smart in part 2 of Pajama Lecture, chapter 3 of your book, Writing and Reading Across the Curriculum, Thesis, Introduction, and Conclusion. So part 1 was Thesis. Now we are on part 2, Introductions. And I can tell you right now, if you will turn with me on page 93, you will see that I've pretty much highlighted this whole entire section of page 93. On introductions. So you need to do the same thing. Your book should look like my book. Okay, so let's just read that first section right there. Section 3.2 of introduction says that you should write introductions that provide a context for your readers. And then it's going to tell you all the different techniques and strategies that you can use for writing that introduction that provides context for your readers. But let's just follow along with me on page 93, section 3.2, because just hang on, because I'm going to read the whole thing. But you've already read it, right? You've read this. You know this. You're just going to follow along with me for a second read since you read it the first time. Okay. Writing introductions and conclusions is usually difficult. How to start? What's the best way to approach your topic? With a serious tone, a light touch, an anecdote. And let me tell you, if you're a creative writer, an anecdote is probably going to be your jam because you're used to storytelling. So you will want to blend your own natural, good storytelling voice with your academic writing, and it will feel very natural to you to start an argumentative essay with the story. That's done a lot by creative writers, and it's one of my techniques as well. Okay, so, and how to end it? How do we start it? How to end it? Like, that's the hardest part, right? How to leave the reader feeling satisfied, intrigued, but provoked. All right, often writers avoid such decisions by putting them off. You just put it off. Like, I don't know how to start this. I don't know how to end this. So just don't go right in medias res. You remember this word from English 1010, your narrative essay, just start in the middle. And your textbook, your 1020 textbook says the same thing. Follow along in the second paragraph. It says, often, writers avoid these decisions of opening and closing an essay by just putting those parts off, and productively so. Bypassing careful planning for the introduction and conclusion, they begin writing the body of the piece. Only after they finish the body do they go back to write the opening and closing paragraphs. There's a lot to be said for this approach because you've presumably spent more time thinking and writing about the topic itself than about how you're going to introduce and conclude it. I love this. So this puts you in a better position to set out your ideas instead of stressing over, oh my gosh, how am I going to start this paper? Oh my gosh, how am I going to conclude this paper? You're thinking about the paper itself and your ideas themselves. Then you get those body paragraphs on the paper, and then a natural introduction will come easier to you and a natural conclusion will come easier to you. Your textbook goes on to say that often it's not until you've actually seen the text, what you want to say on paper or on screen and read it over once or twice, that a natural or effective way of introducing or concluding it occurs to you. I just said that. Okay. Also, you're generally in a better psychological place to write both the introduction and the conclusion after the major task of writing is behind you, and you've already set down the main body of your discussion or your argument. Continue highlighting. An effective introduction prepares the reader to enter the world of your paper. It makes the connection between the more familiar world inhabited by the reader and the less familiar world of the writer's topic. It places a discussion in a context that the reader can understand. If you find yourself getting stuck on an introduction at the beginning of a first draft, skip over it. Skip over that for a moment, state your working thesis directly, and move on to the body of the paper. So you have your working thesis, just go right into your argument. Then come back to the introduction and the conclusion. I'm going to try this myself on my next paper. All right, so then your textbook goes into these wonderful sections on different techniques, different ways to introduce your essay. The very first one is by introducing your single source essay, your argumentative essay, your persuasive essay with a quotation. If you'll turn over onto page 94, here's all you need to highlight under the section that says quotation. It starts at the bottom of 93, but you're not going to highlight until page 94. And that section says at the very bottom, I want you to highlight or underline, bracket, whatever you need to do to point to this is the important section, 3 sentences at the bottom. Quoting the words of others offers many points of departure for your paper. You can agree with the quotation. You can agree and expand on the quotation. You can sharply disagree, or you can use the quotation to set a historical context or establish a tone. That's all you need to know about quotation. So then when you begin your paper, if you're like, I'm like, it's my shtick. You'll find your shtick. It's my shtick to kind of like quote somebody, bring in that ethos into my essay right up front, and then I expand on that. Then you know that you're going to need to refer back to pages 93 and 94 and study up on how to do that. All right, underneath that is a historical view. Say that you want to start your essay with a little mini history lesson for your reader. Here's what you need to highlight on page 94 underneath historical review all the way at the bottom of the page. It says setting a historical context requires familiarity with the topic, and for most student writers, this will involve research. But it may be a topic that you are very familiar with. Maybe you're a historian of sorts and there's something out there that you want to write about that you're so familiar with that you can recall right off the bat. Like this happened this time, this happened that time, and you can pull it right into your essay without, like you've already done the research, right? That's kind of the thing that you study all the time. So, this may be your thing. This may be the way that you want to open up your essay. And if so, then you're going to need to refer back to 94 and look at that strategy underneath historical review. Now, next is the review of a controversy. Like Eminem says, we need a little controversy. So if you want to start your paper with a controversy, I love you, and please do it. But all you need to highlight underneath review of a controversy is on page 95. You will see an example of how to start your paper with a controversy at the top of page 95. And underneath that example, I want you to highlight one phrase. It's not even a sentence right now. A phrase that points you to, oh yes, this was the important part about starting my paper with a controversy. The writer sets out a controversy by reviewing the main arguments for and against. And you can see an example of how to do that when the writer was setting up her paper with a controversy about bilingual education. And then she did this nice little review of a controversy at the front of her paper. So if you're like, I like controversy, that's my shtick on a persuasive essay, then you're going to refer to pages 94 and 95. Bottom of 94, top of 95. If that's the way that you want to go, you're going to need to review that strategy in your textbook. All right, so then we can go from the general to the specific. If you'll look at about the middle of page 95, another way of providing a transition from the reader's world to the less familiar world of the paper is to highlight this, work from a general subject to a specific one. And then there's a nice little example for you there at the bottom of page 95. All right, flip over to page 96. Anecdote and illustration from the specific, to the general. You need to highlight the following 3 paragraphs. You can read those on your own because if I read those to you here, then this video is going to be far too long. So I need you to highlight that you may offer an anecdote that moves the reader from a specific case to a more general subject. And then go to the bottom of that section right there just before we move on to question. I want you to highlight this introduction moves from the specific to the general. The anecdote is one of the most effective means at your disposal for capturing and holding your reader's attention. Why? Because everybody loves a good story, right? Especially if you're a good storyteller. So if you're one of those creative writers, this is going to be the way you want to start your paper. You're still highlighting now. You're holding your highlighter. It's also one of the most commonly used types of introduction in popular articles. For decades, speakers have begun their remarks with a funny, touching, or otherwise appropriate story. So for my student who was bold enough to be the sole hand raiser in my class and say, I don't think college tuition should be free and here's why, he can start his paper with this real story that he has of sitting next to students who are getting all the money thrown at them to go to college and be successful and come with us into the workforce with at least an associate's degree. And he's seeing them sit right beside him while he's doing the work, while he's trying, while he's motivated, while he's showing up. And they're just filling up a chair some of the time. They're not coming to class. When they do, they're late. They're not motivated at all. They're not doing their work. They're not treating college like a job, which is what you're supposed to do to be successful in college, right? So he could start his story right there with sitting next to the student. Sitting beside me is student A. Sitting on the other side of me is student B. And tell those stories right there and then lead into his thesis, which is college shouldn't be free. Okay, moving on to question. It says, you just need to highlight one sentence right there at the beginning. Frequently, you can provoke the reader's attention by posing a question or a series of questions. This is done a lot in English 1010. I have a lot of students that pull me into their essays with asking like 3 or 4 questions right off the bat. And it really does work on me. I fall for it every time because when someone asks me a question, I have a curious mind already. So I'm like, I don't know. And then I want to read their paper and see if they know, right? You're going to ask questions that you know the answers to or that you're going to be answering in your paper. Okay, so if you didn't know the answer to it when you started writing this paper, now you know the answer to it. So you're asking the questions that you're going to answer yourself. But you know that already. Okay, if you'll go over to page 97, highlight this sentence as well. It's right underneath the example of how to start your essay with a question. Opening your paper with a question invites readers to formulate a response and then to test that response against the one you will develop in your paper. All right, so in other words, your reader is sitting there waiting for you to answer the questions that you posed at the beginning of your essay. And by the time, like we may have thought a little bit, like you asked the question and then we're thinking for a minute about our own answers to it. And then we're going to read your paper and we're going to be like, well, this is what I thought. But now I can kind of see their point. Okay, so this is your chance to actually change readers' minds about some things if you want to. All right, statement of thesis. Highlight perhaps the most direct method of introduction is to begin immediately with the thesis. Okay, guys, if you're one of those awesome people, I love you for that. Not my style to like, boom, here's my thesis, the very opening line of my essays, my argumentative essays or my persuasive essays. I typically go back to the storytelling, anecdotal way of opening an essay, but I love it when somebody comes straight out of the gate. Here's my argument. And they're bold and they're strong and they're just like, they can just give it to you like, boom, right off the bat. And then their introduction flows right down from their thesis. I'm super impressed by that. I haven't been able to do it really well myself, but if that's your stick, go ahead, knock my socks off. Okay, underneath that, you have a little example, and then about 5 lines underneath the first paragraph I want you to highlight, beginning with a thesis statement, works well when, as in the case of the example that they give you, a debate is well understood. So you want to settle immediately into making your argument if this is a well-known debate. And right now, are we really having a well-known debate about whether or not college tuition in the state of Tennessee should be free? Probably not, because it was 2017 when the Reconnect was established, right? The Reconnect program. So we really don't have the data yet in just 3 years to find out if it's working. Number one, are we seeing a climb in graduation rates to know that it's working? Or are we seeing a decline? Like, we probably don't have the data yet to have this strong debate about, nope, it's not working. What you wanted to do, state of Tennessee, by letting everybody come to college free, it's not working. We're probably not at that point yet. And it may be a really slow process to make it work. Does that make sense? Okay, so we probably don't have, I mean, if you want to start your paper with your thesis, okay, but we probably don't have this huge debate right now about whether or not college should be free, or I would have had more than one student raising their hand that it shouldn't. Okay, so this is not a really strong debate just yet because we don't have all the facts. We can speculate on them, but we don't have all that data yet to say it's not working. All right, so right down at the, probably getting close to the bottom of page 97 now. And of course, you're following along so beautifully. It says that opening with your thesis also works well when you want to develop an unexpected or controversial argument. So in this case, it would work for you, right? If, for example, you open with the provocative assertion that reading is dead in a paper examining the problem of declining literacy in the digital age, the reader is bound to sit up and take notice, perhaps even protest. No, it's not. I read all the time. Reading is not dead. So this statement, this controversial, like, boom thesis, actually hooks the reader, who is likely to want to find out how you will support such an emphatic thesis. One final note about your model introductions. They may be longer than introductions you have been accustomed to writing. I struggle with introductions myself. My introductions I are always longer than they need to be. I like to think it's because I'm a good storyteller, okay? And I always start with an anecdote. Usually. Okay, so one final note about model introductions. I'm at the bottom of the page. They may be longer than introductions you have been accustomed to writing. Many writers and readers prefer shorter, snappier introductions. The ideal length of an introduction depends on the length of the paper it introduces, and it may also be a matter of personal or corporate style. There is no rule concerning the length of an introduction. If you feel that a short introduction is appropriate, use one. Conversely, you may wish to break up what seems like a long introduction into 2 paragraphs. Now, I have done that before. You guys saw, I posted on pause my introduction to a single source essay on Michael Harriot's article about Pete Buttigieg, and you saw that my introduction all by itself, I must have been going to write a hell of a paper because my introduction itself was like almost a page, almost a page long. So, I was trying to figure out before I posted that, like how to get that into 2 paragraphs, because you can't have your introduction in 2 paragraphs, and your textbook said it. Your textbook said it. Okay, this is the end of part 2 on this particular chapter, chapter 3. So we're going to be moving on to conclusions in part 3 of Miss Smart's pajama lectures. Thank you.